Good morning and welcome to the Purian. I'm your host, Paul Gordon. Illinois is known as the land of Lincoln. We all know why that is, of course. There is little more important in the history of our state than the fact that our 16th president lived most of his adult life in the Prairie State and was indeed an Illinoisan when he became president in 1861. It has probably been almost that long that Illinois has capitalized on Abraham Lincoln being the state's favorite son. For as long as I can remember anyway, Lincoln-related sites have been high on tourism and school field trip schedules, including in Springfield and Lincoln's New Salem. And then there is the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum in Springfield, which has had more than 3 million visitors in the 7 years since it opened, and has become one of the most visited of all presidential libraries. Make no mistake, Abraham Lincoln is a moneymaker. Witness the early box office success of the new film, Lincoln. With that film opening, I thought it would be fun to invite to our show Jackie Hogan, a professor at Bradley University and author of an eye-opening book called Lincoln Incorporated, Selling the 16th President in Contemporary America. We'll talk about her book and some of her findings when we come back. Welcome back to the Purian. With me today is Jackie Hogan, author of the book Lincoln Incorporated, Selling the 16th President in Contemporary America. Jackie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
First, why did you write this book?
Well, as a social scientist, I've always been interested in the stories that nations tell themselves about who they are, where they've come from, where they're going, and not only stories, but images and symbols. And I'd say that in the 150 years or so since his death, Lincoln has become a really powerful symbol of all American virtues and values. So that really led me into an investigation of the ways we use Lincoln, and some might say abuse Lincoln.
Why do you think he has become such an icon? I mean, what is behind the Lincoln mystique, for lack of a better word?
Well, I think there are several pieces of that puzzle. I mean, first of all, I think that maybe more than any other president, maybe more than any other American historical figure, he really embodies the American dream. You know, from the log cabin birth to the highest office in the land, he was the ultimate kind of rags to riches story. And as a nation, we really love those kinds of stories. I mean, Hollywood, our films are full of them. Our television shows are full of them. We love that promise that this could be us. And in fact, when Lincoln first came to the White House, he gave a speech that said, "I am living proof that any one of you, any one of your children could occupy this office, could occupy this White House." And so I think, you know, we love him for the fact that he embodies our greatest hopes and ideals. But also we have to consider the circumstances of his death and his life. But the fact that he died right on the heels of the end of the Civil War, that this was a time when our country was mourning so intensely. Almost no family was untouched by death in the Civil War. And really, I think we, at that point, needed a figure around which to reunite and to heal. And Lincoln became that symbol for us. Another sociologist named Barry Schwartz wrote a wonderful book, 2 books on Lincoln. And he makes the argument that Lincoln was not mourned so lavishly because he was loved so much. Because in fact, during his lifetime, a lot of people really hated him, including a lot of folks in the South, but a lot of people in the North as well really despised him. But Schwartz says he wasn't mourned so lavishly because he was loved so much, but rather he became loved so much because we mourned him so lavishly. In other words, through our process of mourning for him and our expressions of collective grief, we came back together as a nation.
Why was he hated in the South? Was it because he freed the slaves, or has been given credit for the
Well, yes. Well, in the South, of course, in the lead up to the Civil War, he was despised because they thought he was going to emancipate the slaves. Although he said in his first inaugural speech that he wasn't going to do that.
Right.
He said, I do not have the authority, nor do I have the inclination to do so. But they did, they were very suspicious of him. And then once war broke out, the South really saw him as an invader, as a tyrant, as a butcher. But in the North as well, many abolitionists despised him because they felt that he was moving too slowly, that he was resisting emancipation. And many non-abolitionists, many other people in the North did not want to go into a civil war that they thought was being fought to free the slaves. So he really had, enemies on all sides of him.
How was the book received? I mean, given the reverence that is accorded Abraham Lincoln, did some people find it blasphemy almost?
I was afraid of that. Lincoln fans are very passionate and will passionately defend him. And I was afraid that I would draw some fire. But I tried to make clear in the book that I am not in any way trying to knock him off a pedestal, as some Lincoln detractors have tried to do. I am not at all trying to do that. And so, in fact, I have not had any pushback from historians or any others. And surprisingly, I've actually had people say they are grateful for the fact that I've raised questions that are not usually raised when it comes to the Lincoln legacy.
We're going to get into some of those questions, if you don't mind, when we come back. The book, again, is called Lincoln Incorporated, and it's a good read. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the biggest surprises that Jackie found during her research. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Peorian. My guest today is Jackie Hogan, author of Lincoln Incorporated, Selling the 16th President in Contemporary America. Jackie, real quick, before I go on with other questions, you are a professor at Bradley, correct? Professor of?
Sociology.
Okay. Was this book just something that you wanted to do, or was it a project for the school, or what?
No, it was what I wanted to do. So my first book looked at national identity, these kinds of stories of who we are as a nation in the U.S., the UK, Australia, and Japan. So I did a comparative study, and then this was the next book.
And you've got more in the works, I hear?
I do, indeed.
Good. In your research, first of all, how long was your research for this book?
I worked about 3 years on this book. What
were the biggest surprises? Can you tell us?
Well, I think we're all familiar with some of the recent incarnations of Lincoln in advertising.
Yes.
Lincoln playing chess with the talking beaver in the sleeping pill ad, or Lincoln as a professional wrestler in a Diet Mountain Dew ad. So we've seen these. But for me, one of the biggest surprises came when I was working on the chapter on Lincoln in film and fiction. And I found all these wild and wonderful representations of Lincoln I had no clue were out there. So Lincoln the extraterrestrial, Lincoln the sentimental cyborg, Lincoln the action hero, Lincoln the frontier heartthrob in romance novels. That was a surprise. And then Lincoln, of course, the vampire slayer, the zombie hunter. There's a whole kind of fantasy horror genre that features Lincoln as well.
Is that just trying to feed off the name of Lincoln, that they think he's popular enough that people, or beloved enough that people are going to say, really? I got to see this.
I think so. I think that Lincoln has become such a recognizable brand, in part because of his distinctive appearance, but also, in large part because he is so synonymous with all-American values, that authors can do some really kind of jarring, unexpected things with him that capture our attention. So I think that's a big part of that.
Well, a description of the book says that you examine the uses and abuses of Lincoln. Are those some of the abuses you're talking about?
I think it depends on who you're talking to.
Okay.
Some people certainly see these as offensive, as undermining his memory, belittling his accomplishments, and so on. But I think we could look at it as in two different ways. One is that way, but also I think you could argue that in a sense we can play with Lincoln's image in these ways because we're so secure in our esteem and respect for him, our adoration of him, that we kind of can play with him in these ways.
But you don't see any of the other faces on the mountain being called vampire slayers.
Yeah, you don't. You know, I think that Lincoln is really sort of in his own category that way.
Why? I mean, I just don't get it. Do you?
Well, you know, I think he has been so thoroughly mythologized.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, and he is a figure, you know, right from the time we're children, we are learning about the log cabin upbringing, we are learning about the frontiersmen and so on. So he is such a kind of mythic character. He's really become almost more myth than man. And so we can play with him in these other kind of fictional ways.
We know that in the Midwest, I'm from southern Indiana originally, so right next door to Illinois. So in Indiana and Illinois, we certainly learn that stuff about him in school. Did you find in your research that kids in California or Oregon also are learning the same stuff about Lincoln?
Yeah, so I interviewed for this book teachers from across the nation, looking at how Lincoln is taught in K through 12 education, the lessons in Lincoln. I talk about the lessons in Lincoln, and definitely he is taught across the curriculum across the United States. And surprisingly, in not so different ways. I expected to see broader differences between the North and the South. But really, it's the representations of Lincoln in K through 12 education are pretty standard throughout the U.S.
Okay. We're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we'll talk about the new film about Lincoln and get Jackie's thoughts on how Honest Abe is portrayed in some of these films. But first, here is our own Kevin Kaiser to tell us what's happening in the literary world. Stay tuned.
Good morning. Since I have zero interest in books about Christmas, but some of my alleged viewers might have, I decided today I would take a look at this year's most popular holiday titles according to Barnes & Noble. So I got out my trusty Nook and pulled up the Barnes & Noble website where I did a search for the best-selling Christmas books this year, and here are the top 5. Number 5, A Paisley Christmas. Now at first I thought Prince had put out a Christmas album, but in reality the main character's name is Princess Paisley, and in this book she's headed home for the Yule Festival where her special friend awaits her, who may or may not be Prince. Anyway, apparently this is the 3rd book in the Paisley series of novels by Amy Brown, for whatever that's worth. Number 4 is Country Living, Merry and Bright, 125 festive ideas for celebrating Christmas. According to itself, every page of this book is breathtaking, with 125 enchanting ideas for celebrating and sharing the most wonderful time of the year with family and friends. Surprisingly, 37 of those recipes involve doing shots, and almost 20 require intravenous drug use. Number 3, Gooseberry Patch's Christmas Classics Cookbook. And according to the folks at Gooseberry Patch, a classic Christmas involves cheese balls and pizza nibblers. And they guarantee these will be eagerly welcomed at festive gatherings and will lead to the most scrumptious holiday ever. Well, when I think of scrumptious holiday, the first thing I think of is foodstuffs called nibblers and balls. Under our second most popular holiday title, according to the good folks at Barnes & Noble, and that is The Children's Book of Christmas Stories. This book is a compilation of Christmas stories and is perfect for children of all ages. Not much to make fun of there, though. So let's move on to the top-selling holiday book of the season, according to Barnes & Noble, and that is Christmas Cash, White Hot Holiday by Maggie Casper, from the Elora's Cave collection entitled, and I kid you not, Quickies. Now I'm just going to read the jacket blurb and let it speak for itself. A camera, a leather belt, wrapping paper, all the necessary ingredients for a Christmas to remember. Kelly St. Clair thinks she'll be spending Christmas alone. Then Trey Kincaid, a gorgeous cowboy bearing gifts, turns up at her front door on Christmas Eve. Unknown to Kelly and Trey, a little bit of Christmas magic locks them in their house together overnight. Luckily, they will find plenty of things to keep them entertained. Wink. I'm guessing they have lots of board games and books to read. So there you go, the top 5 holiday books this year, according to the fine folks at Barnes & Noble. Go out and get yourself some. And that's it for me. So from my family to yours, have a merry blah, 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 and seasons yada, yada, yada. Cheers.
Welcome back to the Peorian. My guest today is author Jackie Hogan, and we're talking about the commercialization of Abraham Lincoln. Jackie, before I get the thoughts on the new Lincoln movie, again, I wanted to ask you, is there any U.S. president in history that has been as commercialized as Abraham Lincoln?
No, I would say no. I think it's not only presidents. I can't think of another historical figure. I mean, in the same class, I would probably put people like, well, probably George Washington, but not commercialized in the same way. JFK, MLK have also been kind of put on a pedestal in similar ways as Lincoln. But I think because their deaths are more recent, we haven't seen their images transformed in such radical ways. Whereas we can see Lincoln advertising, cheap car insurance for Geico, we would never imagine Martin Luther King or John F. Kennedy being used in that same way. There would be a huge outcry. And I think that's because there are still people who knew them, still people, for whom they were real living, breathing people. And so I think Lincoln is quite different in that way.
And of course, the assassinations of Kennedy and King came right into our living rooms.
That's right.
And with Lincoln, because none of us living now were alive then, it was almost abstract.
Yes, yes.
Have you seen the new Lincoln film with Daniel Day-Lewis?
I have.
What'd you think?
I thought they did a wonderful job with it. It's the screenplay is dazzling. It is just so full of complexity. I think if I had just a few words to describe that film, I would say complex and nuanced.
Really? And again, none of us really know how he talked or anything else, but do you think that's as close as anybody will ever come?
In terms of Daniel Day-Lewis's portrayal, yeah, what I've seen as I've traveled around to all the different museums around the country featuring Lincoln, is that he tends to be portrayed in this big, booming, theatrical voice. That's how we imagine him. But in fact, the historical record suggests he sounds more like Daniel Day-Lewis does in this film, which is a kind of a high-pitched, nasally sort of voice.
At the Presidential Library in Springfield, the first time I heard the Lincoln voice down there, I was surprised at how high-pitched it was. I thought, is that really how he would sound? And somebody down there said, that's what we understand.
That's right. But again, it's in contrast with our image of him as this grand, heroic figure. We just assume he would have this big, booming voice. But what Spielberg, I think, captures very well, and Daniel Day-Lewis captures very well, is more of a reality, a more complex reality.
Okay. Have you seen any of the other films that portray Lincoln in maybe less than historic light?
Yes, and of course, we can think about the Night at the Museum movie, Battle for the Smithsonian, where Lincoln is the action hero who comes in at the end and saves the day. I really like that one. And then more recently, the vampire movie from this summer that featured Abraham Lincoln on a quest to cleanse the United States of vampires. But that one, that one to me was a little bit disturbing because of the underlying premise, which was that people weren't responsible for slavery, people weren't responsible for the Civil War, it was a vampire conspiracy. So it sort of lets us off the hook, lets all of our ancestors off the hook for the sins of slavery and the sins of racism. So I think, the underlying premise of that movie, I felt it was quite disturbing.
Well, do you think they're just trying to, again, capitalize on the Lincoln image?
Yes, and that is what Seth Grahame-Smith, the author, that's what he does. So he's also the author of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, so playing on Jane Austen. So, he did it in a tongue-in-cheek way. The movie, however, kind of lost the humor and took it quite seriously. He was also responsible for the screenplay, but in any case, the movie did take it much more seriously. And although we weren't supposed to believe it, he's not saying this actually happened, that underlying premise is there.
What, did it have any entertainment value?
There were some spectacular action scenes, and if you like blood and gore, it would run to your taste. But other than that, not a great deal.
Jackie, you say you're not a historian. You told me that earlier. But one quick question. In your opinion, could Abraham Lincoln be elected president today?
No, in fact, I think he could not. Certainly, he could not be elected as a Republican president because the GOP is now a very different GOP from what it was in Lincoln's day.
Okay. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And I hope you've enjoyed today's program and that we've given you some eye-opening information about our 16th president. The book is Lincoln Incorporated, Selling the 16th President in Contemporary America. And it can be found at Barnes & Noble and at I Know You Like a Book in Peoria Heights, or of course, online. Remember that you can see today's program as well as previous episodes of The Peorian on our website, thepeorian.com. And tune in next Sunday at 8 a.m. on WHOI TV for a new episode. Have a good week.
Música